Hello, friends. This is Pastor Christopher Maronde, the director of the Lutheran Institute of Regenerative Agriculture. We're on the second half of our conversation with Pastor Ian Kinney, who is a pastor at in Sabetha, Kansas, and also one of my former students, good friend of Lyra, has been out here and worked out here a number of times, and I don't know if there's the right word for it. It used to just be called a pastor. Was a pastor who also had livestock, but today you might be called a homesteading pastor. I don't know. That's nowadays maybe we need
Uh-huh.
the adjective on there. So
Maybe, yeah.
yeah, we're very glad to have you here. We're discussing the book. It was kind of chosen as a foil. I just happened to see it, knew the author, knew that he was kind of a cultural commentator, political commentator, and then also was a farmer. And I ran into this book called "The Land Was Everything: Letters from an American Farmer" by Victor Davis Hanson, and we've been kind of using it as a foil. We found that he does point out a lot of things that are worth thinking about and talking about. We also have some critiques, and I want to hit a couple of them here at the beginning, and then we'll save the big one at the end because I think it's worth actually discussing between the two of us. The you had mentioned we ended the last one with your critique of Dr. Hanson, that he is rather dour, that the tone of the book is I would almost call it dark, really, in many ways. And
Yeah.
it presents a picture of farming that is a struggle, that it's very much a combative view of agriculture. And I certainly understand that view is out there, and there may be elements to that. I would say, what we're trying to do here at the Lutheran Institute of Regenerative Agriculture is to inculcate not a view of agriculture as a combative thing, even though there are elements of it, certainly since the fall, but a view of agriculture that is joy, joy in the abundance of the Lord, joy in stewarding His creation, joy born of the gospel, and a hope that we have that is more than simply will the fruit man pay full price for this load of grapes that I have for him. So if you want to go into your critique on that, Pastor Ian, the on kind of the tone of the book.
hmm Yeah, we can I have one very large critique and we can talk about that at the end if you like. Um, One critique would be, I guess, a confusion of audience. Um, I don't know for whom this book is intended, but I I don't know for whom the book is intended. And what I mean by this is that the confusion of audience would be that there is a lot of name dropping classically. Did you know all the classical references that he was making?
I,
Did you know
I
all of them? I did not.
I did not know all of them. There are a number of them that I did
Yeah.
know. I did not know all of them. We
Yeah. So good.
Well, I was just saying, when you homeschool classically, you start running into some of those names that I
Right.
never
And
learned when I was in high school. But
yeah,
yeah,
so
so you
even
know
for
some
us,
of them.
there's a lot that we were unaware of. And I mean, I've got I've got lots of farmers in my congregation, and they're busy guys and they're busy in their trade. And I don't know a single farmer that reads Marcus Aurelius or Sophocles or even Plato. I just don't know. And so to name drop all of this, I'm not sure what the purpose is, uh, except if it's just his own personal, hiatus or diary entries. Um, so the audience confusion makes it problematic. Um, just not knowing what it's for, and then what its goal is. What is the goal of this book? And then my second out of three. We could talk about the third later, but my second one bleeds into a couple realms, and one is the pessimism, which I think that his pessimism about the situation comes out of his, I assume, atheistic. He doesn't specifically say he is or is not a Christian, but he is clearly evolutionary. He is clearly working on a macro evolutionary system. Especially, you want to talk about, the myths of farming later, and he talks about that farming is not timeless because Homo sapiens have only been farming. I think he says like for the last 6 to 10,000 years or something, right? So he talks about that on the evolutionary scale, farming is not timeless because it is very new with Homo sapiens. And so that is a big critique I have, is his pessimism and his and it's not just him being stoic. I mean, the Stoics, and he's a big classical guy and a man of antiquities, and the Stoics have solutions. Um, and as one of our friends says, well, it's Marcus Aurelius, it's easy to be a Stoic when you're the emperor, but the Stoics have solutions, or even Solomon, right, in his Ecclesiastes, right? There is a massive conclusion at the end of Ecclesiastes, right? A book that is very down, very dour. Life sucks and then you die is kind of the premise of that book. I mean, but Solomon has this massive concluding solution of here is what you do. Um, and we could talk about more of that at the end, but it is just a pessimism. And it is a pessimism that comes out of an evolutionary perspective. Because what he does is he lists all these combatants, and you said it's always combative, right? Where for the Christian, even after the fall, it's not combative, it's dominion. It's not tyranny, but it is dominion, right? You fill the land and you subdue it and have dominion over it. Um, and that is your divine right as someone who bears the image of God. It's your duty as well, but it is your divine right as someone who bears the image of God to exercise dominion over the land, which means you're not competing. There's no combating, right? You bring these things into submission, whether that means clearing a forest, or breaking a horse, or training cattle to stay in their confines, and butchering those that don't. Whatever it is, you exercise dominion, right? And so, for the Christian understanding of this, as we always have, is that it's not we're the top of the food chain. We're in another category, right? And then we exercise dominion over the food chain. So I think that's what leads to his pessimism, is this evolutionary point of view. He mentions a number of times, like our kind of just equity with animals, that humans are just a kind of animal that do this or that weird thing. We're the only ones that farm, and so be it. But his evolutionary perspective is, I think, what leads to his pessimism. And then his evolutionary perspective is definitely a massive critique. Obviously, that his macro evolutionary vision of things that we're competing in. And then he says, maybe farming doesn't last. It's been a brief blip in the history of billions of years. It's been a brief blip, and maybe it doesn't last, right? And we're just a bump in the road on the evolutionary way. That'd be a big critique of mine. That's completely counterintuitive to the Christian story of who God has made us to be, redeemed us to be, and sanctified us to be. And so, this idea that Homo sapiens succeeded over Homo neanderthalis or Homo habilis or Homo australopithecus. I mean, just because we invented farming, and then we demean all these other like subhuman species in this awful racist Darwinian evolutionary point of view. That's what leads to his pessimism a lot, and I think that's what also leads to the biggest critique I have of him later that we could talk about too.
I would give two responses. One, I'm actually going to defend Dr. Hanson just a little bit on the first point. He is a
Okay,
man who lives in two different worlds, and I think that's where you see the
sure.
disconnect of audience. He is himself, and the best way he illustrated was this passage in his book that I thought was fascinating. How he said one day he parked at the college where he teaches. He, the professor of classics, parked his farm truck full, all dirty, beat up, rusty, full of crud in the back, parts, and all
Hmm.
those sort of things, next to the professor of agriculture, who had his immaculate, brand
Yeah.
new
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
pickup with attachments that had no practical use, and so the
Right.
contrast there was very, very interesting. He said, "I, the professor of classics, uh, show up
Hmm.
actually doing this." So I think for him that's difficult is to live in those two different worlds, that academic world and the farm world, and I don't think either world understands the other, and that kind of runs into a larger
Sure.
theme throughout his book, which is the city doesn't understand the country. The country generally understands
Right.
the city
Right.
because we can just turn on our TV and see it. Um, but
Hmm.
the other way around, the city just makes caricatures of the country. So I would give him
Hmm.
a little bit of a defense on that. But again, your larger point is correct. Well, who exactly is going to benefit from this book? Um, here at what we're trying to do here, we're trying to give the basics of a classical education and work with Luther Classical College and other places to ensure that our next generation of food growers, food producers, both for their own family or for the wider community, are people who understand the wider breadth and scope of history and theology. So yeah, we're
Hmm.
I don't know that we necessarily want to go where you just have a bunch of name drops. But if you're informed by the wider warp and woof of Western civilization, that should make you a more moral individual. Now that gets to your other critique, that there is no hope, and it was very interesting to me. I think this was incredibly telling when he talked about chemicals, and he essentially, when he talked about insecticides, he said, I think it was his father, his grandfather said, if it'll kill a man, then just a little bit will kill a bug. And so essentially,
Yeah.
his point was the origin of most insecticides was as wartime chemicals to kill people. And
Right.
that kind of
Right.
scorched earth, us versus them mentality will lead you to yeah, just irradiate the whole your whole plot of land, get rid of all those little bugs, and then we'll just start
Hmm.
afresh. It does remind me a bit. I don't know if you've ever read Hideous Strength from C.S. Lewis, but one of the great utopian dreams of
Hmm.
one of the scientists in that book is a world without biology. We're gonna scrape it clean
Right.
and get rid of all that stuff. And uh, the temptation for the farmer is to do that because the bugs they're relentless. The weeds, they're
Hmm.
relentless. The opponents are relentless. So I guess what we're trying to learn and then teach here is as a Christian, can we approach our stewardship of the land in the way that you described, more of a dominion, having dominion aspect instead of a combative, we're here to take down nature type picture. So the kind of practices we're trying to inculcate here are ones that work with the creation, use natural processes to help make the land more fruitful. But you see the temptation, and he talked about the temptation, that if I want to have a crop, I'm going to go out and spray. And he had one note of very interesting, and I mean again, very dour, but very, very interesting, how the farmer, and this is him speaking, I'm not saying every farmer thinks this way, this is what he's saying, that the farmer puts as much chemicals on as he thinks that won't kill his children or himself in 10 years. um and so yeah, it's this scorched earth approach. And I think you and I would say, as Christians, not even just as farmers or agriculturalists, or agricultural commentators, but as Christians, that there has to be a better way to go about it. And I think you're right, it goes all the way down, it seeps down, it comes from um his wider theology or philosophy of life, which you would find no
Hmm.
evidence in this book of Christianity. I have no idea what he claims
Right.
as a person, but you find no evidence of that, of any sort of Christianity in this book. Let's talk about briefly. I wanted to get to these because I found them at least worth talking about. At least worth talking about. He does the myths of farming. And again, some of these because of the combative nature that he views farming. Uh, and I think that this conversation is great because he's giving us a great foil. We've learned some things. We've seen some things that are very helpful, and then we're seeing things that we can respond to and help clarify how we best should think through things. But the myths of farming, and I'll just list them out here. First is that farming is serene, and these are all myths that generally city people have about farming. Farming is serene. Farmers are nice. That one was pretty funny. At least, it sounds funny. I was gonna say he's a dour writer, so there's not a ton of laughs in here, except for cynical laughs. Farming is simple. That was the next one. The next one, the one after that, is interesting. Agribusiness threatens our food supply, and I'll just explain that real quick. His point is what we talked about in the first half: is that agribusiness produces an enormous amount of food for people, and it's a food that, as he puts, you had the quote, it looks great and it tastes and it's tasteless and has very little nutritional value, and you can get it any time of the year. So what are your trade-offs? What are your trade-offs? So his point is, yeah, agribusiness is providing that if that is what you want. Fifth myth: farming is timeless and forever. And then I think that's it. Yes, and you had mentioned that before. Do you have any of those that you'd like to point out or comment on?
Yeah, besides I think all the myths of farming, him kind of deconstructing what he thinks people think. And like you said, I mean, he was a university prof. He knows what people think. He's, he is kind of in the know with university type folks. Um, but yeah, so it's serene, nice, simple, threatens the food supply, and it's timeless. So yeah, to go through those, that farming is, and then he just breaks them all down, and doesn't have hope for them.
Yeah.
Because I think some of these are kind of goals to us, kind of like strive towards. But so farming is, not farming is serene, first myth, and then he deconstructs the whole thing. Uh, and my concern, along with a couple of other these, is that again, he's doing this because there is no good. There for him there is no. I mean, he's a classicist, so he has to be, striving at some point for things that are good and true and beautiful. But there is no good. So farming's not serene. It's just war. It's just constant war, and there is no peace. There is no success. There is no serenity in the matter. Um, so I think that's a bit of pessimism as well. He harps on that farmers are not nice. Now, um, me of all people, I'm definitely not a fan of nice, and as which is very kind of very C.S. Lewisian, right? God is good and kind, but he's not nice. Or on the flip side, there's the corrective agencies in his dystopian novels of the Corporation of Nice,
Yes. Yep.
right? The Institute of Corrective Behavior. Um, and so I understand that, but that there's also a false equation of niceness and kindness. That because you work a rough and gruff job, that does not presuppose that you have to be a solitary modern man with no family and no kindness and no charity. These do not have to equate with each other. The threatening of the food supply. The first question I always have is what is food? Who gets to decide? And when do we agree on what fits in the category, right? Um, a lot of these things that we kind of trot out as food, um, majority of human history, I think, is unrecognizable as such. And then things that we kind of can shape into things that look like food. I mean, this is a pet peeve of mine. What is food? If you are made in the image of God and you are given to be man, there should be an order to diet and food. And so it threatens the food supply. Okay, And the question of, you can no longer feed the world with um, with farming techniques of antiquity. You can no longer feed the world with small scale farming, right? You just can't. But there's a lot of presuppositions there. Does anybody need as much food as they eat? First of all, second of all, what are you calling food? Just things you shape into food shaped entities. Um, and again, this was 20 years ago. Now we've had a lot of work done to where, what he was struggling through then. I've seen a lot of positivity on how good and efficient, right, small scale farming can be. And again, the last one, that timeless, and he takes shots that it's timeless. He takes a lot of shots at the back to the land movement, which was in its, neonatal stages, I think, or the kind of revamping of the back to the land movement was in its neonatal stages back there in early 2000s. Now, I mean, you and I know it's quite vast, and he takes a lot of shots at that. He takes a lot of shots at the child version of it. Now it's grown, and I'd be curious if he still dislikes it so much now. But again, also that the timeless, he takes shots because he says it's not timeless. He says you're being a hopeless romantic. It's not timeless. It's only a couple thousand years old, and maybe it goes away. But he's in his evolutionary point of view, Homo sapiens started farming just a couple thousand years ago, and so that I take shots at that too. So those are some of the critiques I would have of his myths. Even though, again, I think I think I understand his base point of some of them, but those are the critiques I would have of his myths.
Yeah, and I think I like you kind of just hinted at this at the beginning. We could twist each of those around from a myth and say they're an aspiration. Except the agribusiness one kind of doesn't
Yeah, sure.
work that way very well, but the other three
Yeah.
do. The other four do. That yes, we want farming to be timeless. We want real food and we
Mhm.
want people to produce it. Yes, we want farmers to aspire to
Right.
charity and love and kindness and compassion for their neighbor. And I would say the one of the better ways to do that is to actually interact with your customers and on a daily basis and see them and work with them and rediscover that joy of actually making food that goes to people's tables. Farming, if we can get out of that kind of war mentality, conflict mentality, then farming can be have its serenity, right? I mean,
Right.
if I as I walk through the pastures or and that sort. I mean, there are a few more beautiful moments than in this creation that God has given than walking to the crest of our pasture and looking out
Right.
across the sea of trees and grass and fields all in
Yeah.
every direction, and our cattle down the valley there. It's just there's a lot of beauty there. And then what was the other one? Simple. Yeah. I mean, it's uh, farming.
Yeah.
Even the style of farming, which is more simple, which is what we're trying to inculcate here. There's still complexity to it. You still got to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot
Yeah.
to learn,
So
but
that
it's
that
much
is a
more
myth that
simplified.
could uh yeah, that is a myth that very well could be shot down. That the idea that if you are just a farmer, or just an agricultural kind of guy, that um that you couldn't think your way out of a wet paper bag. That does need to be shot down very well.
Yeah.
Whether, like, my farmers are, um I mean, I can't even understand the machines that they use. I mean, they're just so vastly complicated. I mean, these guys are not dumb. And so, like, and with you guys on a much smaller scale, a much simpler scale, that is extremely difficult. And it's extremely difficult to do well, or that if it goes south, to recover, to manage all these different schedules at all these different times, and all the, what are now all, no pun intended, but farmed out to other people, that you are all doing on one place, right? The raising and the rearing and the dispatching and the butchering, and then the use, and then you teaching that to others. There's no way that's simple. So yes, that is a myth, that the farmers are just de facto simpletons that know nothing about life. Yeah, I agree with that. That needs to be demythologized, I could say.
Well, let's get to your final biggest critique, and you hinted at it earlier. Let's kind of use that as to springboard to our concluding conversation on this book. Well, give it to us.
Mhm.
What is your biggest critique of Dr. Hanson's work here?
My biggest critique, and you correct me if I'm wrong, if you found something different. My biggest critique is that I don't remember a single solution offered. So when we talk about sin and grace, or law and gospel, right? The severity of sin has to be brought to light so that the sweetness of God's grace uh, kind of hits home, right? And then if your sin is not severe, then your salvation is not sweet, right? The woman in Simon's house, right? She loved much, right, because she was forgiven much. So if there is no awareness of that, then you don't have the realization of the beauty of God's grace and salvation in Christ. So each of these chapters, it's so severe, right? He has these such severe critiques of life and people and farming. And so with that severity, I think, dadgum, there's going to be a massive, great solution for this at the end. Because usually that's how things work, is that if you put all these problems forward, there is usually a solution. And at the end of every chapter, it's just period, chapter 2. There's no solution. And so that's it. That kind of makes it just vapid. You're just laying out all these problems. And okay, some of these are legitimate problems, but do you have any thoughts on what could be done about it? Right? You've thought about this so much, right? You've thought about this so much. You've done all this work. Have you not reflected on what now a solution could be? That is my overarching concern and frustration, is that with all of these problems, great, you see this as a problem that need to be critiqued. I don't know if you're compelled to offer a solution, um, but but it but why not? I mean, why not offer a solution if you're the one who's aware of all these problems? And I didn't find a single solution. I'm not talking about positivity and negativity. He seems like a very negative guy. Maybe he reads the cynics too much. I don't know. But to not have any solution is a big problem. Not even just ideas that maybe won't work, right? But to not have a solution is my biggest critique. I didn't find a single one in the book.
No, and it seems like he points his barrels at, yeah, everyone. And so, I would read certain passages to my wife, and she'd sometimes put up her hands like, what are we supposed to do? That
Right.
he gives the problem on this end, and this is really bad, and then people have tried to approach it from this, and he says, well, that doesn't work. Well, okay, what what
Mhm.
what are we supposed to do here? And uh we are either trapped in our circumstances in our history, or we seek solutions.
Right.
And he certainly doesn't provide any. He's very good at diagnosing a lot of the problems, but yeah, what
Mhm.
what is the path forward? Um do we think that perhaps in small ways that we're trying to forge a path forward? Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what Lyra is all about, is trying to forge a path forward, trying to encourage homesteading and farm to table local food, all that kind of stuff. Where that's part of a big thing of what we are trying to do here. Will it be the end all be all silver bullet? Well, of course not, of course not. But at least we're
Right.
driving to look at different things, and the people that I try and read and I interview here are trying very innovative different things. Some of them may work, some may not, but they are trying to approach stewardship of the earth, and most of the farmers I interview here are Christian, of course, trying to approach the breakdown of society, to trying to approach the the need for local food, for for better food, so that we're not stuffing and starving ourselves to death, as you said in our first part. There are people trying, maybe it won't all succeed. It probably won't all succeed in a human
Sure.
sense, but they are approaching stewardship of the land, I would say, from a perspective. Not all of, in the wider world, not all of them are Christian. The ones we've interviewed here have so far been Christian, and that's the perspective they're going from. It's a perspective of hope, a perspective of joy, I would say. Not that every single day is laugh out loud funny or and exciting, but that you do it with a sense of joy, that we have been placed on this creation to steward it, to care for it, and that's an awesome responsibility. It's a weighty responsibility. It's not an easy responsibility, but it's one that does bring with it quite a bit of joy. We can
Yeah.
revel in this task, and I did not see. I kept waiting to see some sort of joy there in the task that he has been set. And I think buried underneath all that, I think he does it because I mean because he wants to. Um, certainly he's had opportunities to flee, I'm sure. So the fact that he's still on the land says something. But if if what you're doing is turning you into a dark, depressed, angry person, maybe we need to think about how we can do things differently.
Right. Yeah. And obviously for us, you know, which is I think why the vapidity of it and just the vacuousness comes out so clearly to you and I would say, is because obviously there is a very clear right solution, right? As we sing, you cast down your pride, your sin deplore, and bow before the crucified, right? That you repent of the sins and idols within your own soul, and then whatever the next, small section outside of you is, move to that and just start at the closest circle to you of, belief in the gospel and repentance and faith, and then let that bleed out into other ways in which now that you have this right faith in God and in His Son, that bleeds into other things that we only have a positive outlook. This right, this has to work, right, at large in the church, and then when it bleeds into your life and your vocation, um, is to having this just rejecting pessimism and evolutionary onslaught of lies, and knowing that God is good and working all things for the good of those who love Him. And so you in love, you try to do the best you can with the information you have, and when you fail, then right, the next generation will pick up and take over. But you have to, I mean, you have to at least pick up the torch. If you don't, if you're mad that it's dim or it's just a dimly burning wick, or I mean, you have to pick up the torch and carry it on and try to provide the next generation with solutions that they could be able to build on. And obviously you guys at Lyra, you do an excellent job of bridging this classical ed, right, with small scale farming and doing things well on a small scale. Right, that's an option for a solution. And if someone has another solution to try that, great. And then we get, all these different places trying different things, and I mean, just to try something and move towards a solution, but just to bemoan everything and then just mope and grope around, um, it's so unproductive. It gets nothing done, and it provides no future for our children.
I think there's a lack of freedom there, and he's bound to, well, first of all, most foundationally, when you have not Christ, and again we're surmising that we're surmising that from what he's written, and when you don't have Christ, you don't have freedom, and that's going to bleed into everything else. And so for him as a a fruit grower in California, he is in bondage to the markets in New York. He's in bondage to this
Mhm.
whole system, and he can't get out of that by himself anymore than he can rescue himself from his sins. Um, so I see a profound sense of bondage. So the Christian farmer then should, because we have been set free by Christ, then we have freedom in other things. We should, that freedom bleeds out into our other arenas of our life,
Mhm.
and with freedom comes joy. And the Christian has a joy that a hailstorm can't take away,
Right.
that the disaster of a crop or losing an animal can't take away. It's a much deeper
Right.
joy. We've read the end of the book and we win,
Right.
as Dr. Gibbs said. So we have something much deeper that then we can take out into all of our other relationships in this world and all our other vocations in this world. So we step forth in joy, we step forth in freedom, and freedom brings joy, and we can rejoice
Yes.
in that. I think we're out of time. It's been a wonderful conversation. We're very glad to have Pastor Kinney with us today to chat about this book, kind of use it as a foil to talk about some important things. And we're good way to start off and launch into the new year. I'm hoping to look at books of various sorts off and on as we move forward, and we'll continue to do our interviews with farmers and other folks. But we got a couple of very important interviews coming up in the next couple of weeks as we get ready to launch and promote the next big thing here at Lyra coming up in 2024. So keep your eye out for that, friends. Pastor Kinney, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, friends, God's blessings. Continue to share our videos and interact on the Facebook page and let others know about the work we're doing here. God's blessings.